This is W, host of the High Art on the Edge page, host of this podcast feature known as Surprise Cast. Happy New Year to all. Happy 2026. And we're going to launch into the new year with an interview, the band, and a brand new album they're going to talk about, and so much more. Let us welcome KEELEY Band, if you will. Hello, KEELEY. How are you doing? Nice to see you. And could you tell the podcast listeners where you are podcasting from?
Okay, so I'm podcasting from dear old Blighty, which, as Smith's lovers will know, is a reference to England. Podcasting from England, and so are all of my bandmates, or both my bandmates and our producer, and they're going to be introducing themselves now, because it's lovely to have us all in the one place. We're never in the one place together. Sometimes it's the three band members, or it's Alan, who is our producer, and Lukey, or it might be Alan and Andrew, but to actually get, or Alan and myself, but it's the first to ever get all three of us, all four of us, and five, including you, W, into the room. So yes, congrats for bringing together this United Nations-esque summit, sonically speaking.
Cheers to you. And yes, nice to see everyone. Let's just bring Lukey in. Lukey, you want to tell everyone where you are podcasting?
Hello, everyone. I am in the depths of southeast London in East Dulwich, a lovely little part of southeast London, near to where we've played numerous gigs, in fact, as a band. As recently as last month, we were at the iconic New Cross Inn supporting the Wooden Tops.
And we're going to talk about concerts coming up later in the year to promote this new album. Nice to meet you finally. Alan, could you tell us where you are podcasting from?
Hey, W. Yeah, I'm in Dublin, Ireland, in a little room in my house, which is the music studio, and sometimes it's the office, and sometimes it's just where we keep the clothes to get them.
Nice to meet you, Alan. Andrew, tell us where you are podcasting from.
I'm podcasting from Notting Hill Gate, round the corner from where Hugh Grant had it off with a sex worker. And I think that, given the fact that that news story is incorrect, gives you some idea of just how close I am to the seat of power. It's literally just 4 miles up the road to Westminster. So lying is a great quality to have around this part of London. No, seriously, it's beautiful outside. It's -1 and gorgeous. It's a lovely part of London. It really is.
Okay, well, that's good to hear, because when I visit London later in the year, I want some good weather, okay?
You'll get some. I'll
Thank
see to it. I can make these things happen.
So welcome all to Surprise Cast, and I want to get into our conversation by doing one icebreaker question with you all. And this comes from a gentleman he goes by The Rock. He was in Moana, he's in Fast and Furious, and he was interviewed, roundtable discussion. And this is what he had to say, and I want to get your thoughts based on his comment here. He's talking about a movie that he put out this year, and he said this: well, I think it was planned by something more powerful than me. Sure, destiny. I believe in the universe, but I also wanted to grow, and I wanted to challenge myself. So here's my question. This one goes to all of you, but we're going to start with KEELEY. How did you challenge yourself in 2025? And how would you like to challenge yourself in 2026?
2025, I challenged myself in many ways. So first of all, from a musical point of view, which is always a challenge, doing anything in the quote-unquote modern world as an independent indie music artist, because it's never been harder to make headway as an indie artist. For many reasons, which I don't want to go into, because I could get easily, I could get my conversational wagon stuck down any one of those very narrow little avenues. So challenged myself musically by, I suppose, like the collective challenge was to how do we record for the first time as a band, because prior to this record, Alan and I had made all the records together. And Alan and I started work together in the summer of 2019, and we have a studio partnership that just works brilliantly. We're both very different as people, but we complement each other's strengths and qualities perfectly. To cut a long story short, over the course of a number of albums, I had formed a band in Ireland, and that ran its course. And then I moved to England, and even before moving to England, I'd met Lukey, and Lukey and I had formed a live band together, and we started touring. And we had a different drummer with us called Tom, and before that was a different drummer called Tim, and before that was a different drummer called Pete. But Lukey and I formed this band, based in the UK, but based in England for the first time. And I was living in Ireland at the time, so it was crazy because I would fly over to do a rehearsal, and then I'd fly all the way back, and then fly over to do a gig. And none of these gigs, rehearsals, made any money. It was a crazy thing to do. And I have to give a big shout out to Mickey Bereni, formerly of Lush, currently of Mickey Bereni for you, who I know you're a very, very big fan of, William, because I know you've had her on your podcast before, and also you've had us both on the High Art podcast to do a joint interview together. But she put me up. She gave me somewhere to stay. She gave me somewhere to practice while I was over there, and basically enabled me to form this English lineup with Lukey and go and play these shows and start developing. And then we met Andrew, and then Andrew joined, and then we went out and started playing shows together. Within a relatively short period of time, it became something that we really wanted to do, to try and capture the sound of the band, but also I thought it was really important to maintain my studio partnership with Alan. And we thought, well, can we bring those two worlds together? And this is the year, or 2025 was the year where we brought those two worlds together for the first time in the midst of doing our most intensive touring schedule yet, where we played London, I think 5 times, Bristol 4 times. We did a whole load of touring all over England and Scotland. And we did tours supporting bands like Northside, the Boo Radleys, Echo Belly, Terrorvision, Hezbollah, formerly The Fall. And then we finished the year with, we also flew with the Inspiral Carpet. We finished the year with our biggest show yet, which was supporting Baby Shambles at Bristol Academy. It was the biggest show we played. It was an amazing crescendo for the year. So there was musical challenges in terms of how do we integrate all of what we do as a band, and how we integrate that with the work that Alan and I have been doing, with Alan's production and with my singing and guitar playing and everything, and bringing it all together. And then just pushing ourselves sonically as well, because artists tend to get bored very easily. And it's a great thing. And then it's for record companies, it can be a nightmare because they tend to want artists to churn out more of the same. Whereas the artistic mindset is to always strive for more and always push forward. And without that intent, without that hunger, you wouldn't create in the first place. So it's essential to have that mindset. But I always want to do different things, and I know that Alan does as well, and Lukey and Andrew. So with this record, we've gone to places we've never gone before sonically. It's we can get into later on if you like about exactly what that involves. But there's just a lot. We've challenged ourselves with this record. But on a personal level, I also managed to challenge myself to lose weight because I wanted to how do I say, lose a few skins. And I did that, but I lost 3.5 stone, and I managed to maintain that. So I'm proud of that, because I've been trying to do it for 10 years, and I finally figured out how to do it.
Alan, Lukey, or Andrew, anything you would like to add to what Keeley said? You want to share something of your own regarding challenges? Alan, go for it.
I'll jump in because it's real quick. I set myself the challenge to learn the mandolin in 2025 because there's a Keeley tune that's kind of, thought it might be folky, could come out sounding like the band or something. So I thought we'll try and give it that feeling, and I'll get a mandolin and I'll learn how to play it. So I got the mandolin, and I figured out how to play Losing My Religion by REM on the first day. And then I did that, and then I was like, that's kind of nowhere left to go with this thing. So I gave it up. But yeah, I don't know. It might still come in. I might come back to it next year. There might be, if you hear a Keeley song that sounds kind of like the band, and it's got a mandolin on it, then I went back to the mandolin.
And is it true? And I think Peter Buck of REM said this. I'm paraphrasing very simply. He said something like, when you take a mandolin, it is one of the most difficult instruments to tune.
There's a lot of strings, and they're very close together, and they're so high that you just live in constant fear that it's going to snap, and it's going to just like like scratch your face off in the middle of doing this. So it feels like you should get danger money for playing it. Sure. Yeah.
It is, yeah. I think for me, probably the thing to overcome in 2025 is like that conflict between home life and life on the road. And I mean, life on the road is an absolute privilege. You know, as Keeley often says, music's the greatest thing in the world, and the sonic cause is all. I have a very demanding day job. On top of that, I work in adult social care, managing a big back office team of 15 people. And I think that's increasingly the reality for a lot of people in the industry, regardless, even people at fairly high level. You know, you hear about people signed to pretty big indie labels now who are still having to make a living outside of that, you know, to make ends meet. As Keeley mentioned earlier, that is the reality of the industry in this day and age. And I know Keeley's covered that extensively herself in previous conversations with your W. But yeah, that is quite a challenge, especially for someone like me who's neurodivergent, not the best at planning and organising. But as well as having, you know, this great team of people, Keeley and Alan and Andrew, we have a very supportive manager, Nick Cliff, who really does keep everything ticking over well for us in terms of the band's logistics. He's very good to us, and I've got a very supportive partner at home. So yeah, certainly not on my own doing, but yeah, that was probably the biggest challenge. But I feel like there's a rhythm now finally with it, and you know, able to balance the two quite well. Going back to what the Rock said about kind of, you know, the universe taking care of things, I've actually never been a believer in trusting the universe, because I think you make your own fate, and I think so much of it is down to luck and circumstance. And you know, people say work hard and you can achieve anything. Well, I don't believe that either. It's a combination of things. You know, you've got to work hard, that hope all the pieces come together for you. But you know, if you have the right people around you and you treat people the right way and you approach people with kindness and compassion, then I think the doors open more easily for you, and that's certainly an approach we all try to do in this band.
Andrew, you're nodding your head. Yeah. Do you want to speak to what Lukey said, if you don't mind?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'd like to know what Dwayne Johnson had taken half an hour before he said that, because it's pretty intense. He's obviously running for the Democrat president in 2.5 years' time, so good luck to him. But I think for me, actually, it's a challenge that really came up from nowhere, which was I'd sort of had this image in my head that drumming was simply me arriving and playing on a drum kit that had been set up by someone, and I was simply had to get there by some means. And that's how it had been in my professional life a lot of the time. And this has been a totally different experience. I've had to figure out how to load a kit into the back of a car. I'm not kidding you. This does sound like, you know, a bit of entitlement, but it's true. I've had to think about how to load a kit in the back of the car, how to drive somewhere safely, how to sort of hustle everyone at the end and get back home safely, and just get into that mindset where you're in charge of the kind of logistics of traveling and making sure that it works. And that's been a total eye-opener. And I've gradually and slowly really started to enjoy it. But it was a challenge, which I think I'm honest in saying I really didn't quite know how to approach it at first. And I think I've gradually opened up to it. Well, in fact, I bought a brand new car to accommodate it. So that's a commitment for 2025, I'd say.
Thank you for sharing. And it sounds like this was a whole different ball of wax for you in terms of your experience way back working with Morrissey, yeah?
Well, and subsequently, yeah. I mean, often there'd be, you know, all sorts of things laid on, hired kits and goodness knows what else. It's almost like it was like going back to playing when I was young and hungry in bands in London mostly. And it would just always be very sweaty and very harried, but totally and wonderfully satisfying. And that is exactly how I feel now, which is great. I feel youthful again. Thank you, Keeley.
You're so welcome. It's really interesting to hear you say that, because the degree of hardship is all I know, and the kind of, you know, down actually the sort of, what's the word, the sort of lo-fi life of having to deal with just, you know, having to navigate life in an indie band and at the level that we're at is all I'm familiar with. So as ludicrous as it probably, I often wonder what it must look like to cut on the outside, but because I don't have any concept of it in any other way, it's fascinating to hear that there is another way. It's like one of the things I find so weird about this era is that like no one can have a hit anymore. No one can have a hit. You cannot have a hit anymore, which is pretty amazing when you think about it, because it's like, you know, when I was getting into music, bands had hits, like actual bands had hit singles or hit albums. And it's mad to think. It's like, you know, I often think if any of kind of my heroes when I was getting into music, like Blur or the Stone Roses or the Smiths or the Manic Street Preachers or any of those bands, I mean, if those bands had not had access to, like, if the music press, like The Enemy, Melody Maker, but apparently at one time there was 4 weekly music papers. I only ever remember there being 2, but apparently back in the 80s there was 4, and 70s, and you know, there was 4. But if they hadn't had access to those things, if they hadn't had access to things like TV appearances, Top of the Pops, I mean, if take a band like the Smiths, they couldn't have made it. How could they have made it? They wouldn't have gone on Top of the Pops and been beamed into 10 to 15 million people's homes overnight. If there was no John Peel show these days, there's a million John Peels, but they all have an audience of about 10 people. Like, there is not one show with 1 million listeners that plays alternative stroke indie music. That doesn't exist anymore. So all of those things, if you'd taken all of those building blocks out of the equation for any of those bands, TV appearances, music press, the John Peel show or the Kid Jensen show or the Steve Lamacq or all that kind of thing, or the Evening Session as it used to be in England in the 90s, those bands, it doesn't matter how good their songs are, who would have heard them? No one. So it's fascinating looking at how would those bands have fared in this current era. They couldn't have. They would be playing to 3 people in your local pub and being asked why they're not doing covers. You know what I mean? That's the real. And they would be working in Waitrose. And getting back to Lukey's point, because and that's just part of the mad reality that we live in nowadays, where it's whatever the world is, it's definitely not advanced. It's not more advanced than it used to be 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. Amazing.
Lukey wants to respond.
Think about what Keeley said about hits. It brought to mind James Murphy of LCD Sound System and a lyric of his from their 3rd album, This Is Happening. You wanted a hit, but that's not what we do.
That's a great quote right there. And I would also say that in response to what you said, Keeley, this is simply by my experiences lately in the last 1 to 3 years regarding hits and music. I think there are hits, but I think music has become so easy to access. There's so much of it all the time. You can go anytime, any place, anywhere, and access whatever you want. And I feel like that has, for better or for worse, diluted the experience with music. That doesn't take away people trying to achieve high status. But I just think there's so many flavors and choices now. That's what to me makes it hard to.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the main things is like the lack of arbitrators. Like, you know, there used to be, if you want to call them gatekeepers, and I know that you know, they could be quite vicious, quite ruthless, and they could turn on bands, but they made so many bands. They elevated so many bands from nowhere, from 0 to hero. If you take Suede, for example, I mean, Suede were on the front cover of Melody Maker, which was a big newspaper, a big music paper in the UK back in the 90s, and maybe before that too. And they put Suede on the front cover of that before they'd even released a single, and they called them the best new band in Britain. And it just happened that they were the best new band in Britain because they were amazing, and they were about to release a succession of incredible records, and they were a brilliant live band and all that. But the music press were incredibly influential in the UK. And obviously the music press is now gone. Radio was incredibly influential, I think in the US more than in the UK. Radio is now a very different thing. it just seems to be that although there's more music released than ever, like in 2023, there were in 2025, there were 45 million tracks released that year. 45 million, which is more. So there were more tracks released on any one day of last year than there were in the whole of 1989. That's just an example of how mad it is. And it ties into what you said there, Debbie, about there being just this overflow of music. With that overflow, it's so much harder to discover what you like. You can stumble upon things randomly, and we all do. And, and there's still certain, like, for example, I mean, when I try and think of like, like I bought Mojo, which is a great magazine, and I used to love it. And I was buying groceries the other day, and I thought, oh my God, there's Mojo. And Bowie was on the cover, and there was an article inside on Squeeze and the Pretenders, and I love all those bands, so I bought it. But I was like, I wonder what new bands are going to be featured inside it. And I thought they'll probably only feature maybe one or two new bands. And sure enough, they do. And the two new bands that they feature, one of them are the Womack sisters. And the reason that they feature them was because they know that they can announce them to their Mojo readership as the relatives of Sam Cooke and the granddaughters of Sam Cooke and the daughters of Bobby Womack and all those people. And then there's another band called the Gnomes, who are a very retro band steeped in 60s influences. So even the two new bands who managed to get a little feature in the current edition of Mojo are basically trading off, very much traditional classic rock, essentially. So yeah, it's just so much harder for new music to be made aware of, or for it to be publicized, because there are, I always say this, there are a million bands below our band in terms of stature and awareness. There's a million bands below us. There's a million bands at our level of awareness, and there's a million bands above us. What can you do? What can you do? But despite that, we believe, and Lucy referenced it earlier, I've got this mantra, and I say it religiously: music is the greatest thing in the world. And I think we all believe that. I certainly believe it. And the sonic caused this all. And no matter how many times I hear these cultural commentators coming out with these comments like music is dead, or guitars are dead, or rock is dead, or whatever they say, show me anything better, because I've yet to see it. Music is the greatest thing in the world. So for as long as music is the greatest thing in the world, music will always be the greatest thing in the world. That is just the mindset that I have, and I think that we take forward with us. It's like, okay, we're in this impossible situation. Fuck it. Let's just go forth and shoot wildly in the dark if needs be. But it's like we're going out in a blaze of glory.
Yeah.
Something valiant about that.
And what I've heard, Keeley, before we move into a quote by David Byrne, what I've heard from other artists at this time period, this juncture, they feel like artists have each other's backs more because of the challenges that have arisen from being an indie artist. There's not so much, for lack of a better term, backstabbing, if you will. Now, that may be there, but from what I've heard, it just seems as a collective group, artists are really trying to be in each other's corner of the rings. Lukey?
Yeah, I'll happily come in on that. And I think it ties in a bit with kind of the changing tides, like Keeley said, and we're definitely in the nostalgia market. And the author Simon Reynolds wrote a great book about this called Retromania, and funnily enough talked about Mojo in that book as well. And Mojo actually started out as a kind of counterculture magazine, so it's funny to think about its trajectory and how it's ended up, because as far as I can remember, since I started reading music magazines, it's always been very much a legacy kind of nostalgia trip, like almost an MOR kind of vibe to it. But yeah, there's certainly something that chimes there, W, in what you're saying about artists sticking together, because certainly we've met on our tours so far, and the people we've supported, we've found some wonderful people who have really looked after us, and have helped to further our cause. The Smythes, one example of that, who we play a lot of gigs with, and we've built up such a kinship with them now. Bands like the Boo Radleys, Northside, Mickey Berenier, the Primitives, who we just played with a couple of months ago,
Big time.
and so many more as well. But they're bands who, well established already and don't need to give us the time of day really, but have seen what we do and, worked with us on the road, hung out with us, and they really believe in us. And, they have been wonderfully accommodating in giving us that platform. So yeah, I think there is certainly truth in what you say there about artists trying to stick together in these trying times.
And just to close this part of the conversation, when I spoke with Seiss and KEELEY, if I remember correctly, Seiss had talked about the appreciation that indie bands have for one another, particularly the longevity of bands that can help support maybe the smaller indie bands or vice versa. And I have seen the list of artists that all of you have played with. I mean, I'm over here in the Bay Area and fuck, I wish I could go over there and see all those amazing shows, because I imagine even though they're not maybe at Royal Albert Hall or, big venues, the reaction from your fans, that's gold right there, my friends. Oh, good stuff.
The ferry, the Galloway Princess, docked at Larne shortly after 9:30 that evening, but the witnesses say Ingham was not among the foot passengers who boarded the train to Belfast. Were you on that train? If so, did you see
Daydreams and trains, April 1980.
Okay, now speaking of someone that has weathered all sorts of storms in the music industry and who has pretty much been an icon for many, many years, but he kind of moves at his own pace and trajectory. And of course, I'm talking about the ex-frontman for Talking Heads, David Byrne. And there's a book that came out called How Music Works, written by him. And it's a wonderful book that he enthusiastically shares his take on the music industry and goes deep into the history of it and statistics and all that. And I want to read something to you. And this comes from a section called The New World. And Andrew, after I'm done reading it to you, I'm going to ask you a question if you don't mind. Here we go. So this is what he says. Records were fairly cheap for much of the 20th century, cheaper than a concert ticket. And as they became more widely available, people in small towns, farmers, and kids in school can now hear giant orchestras, the most famous singers of the day, or music from their distant homeland, even if they never have the opportunity to hear any of those things live. Not only could recordings bring distant musical cultures in touch with one another, they had the effect of disseminating the work and performances of singers, orchestras, and performers within a culture. So here's my question for you, Andrew. Talk about some records for you that kind of opened your ears, opened your eyes, and provided that spark for you.
Wow. What to choose from, I think, is the question. Really, so difficult. I think one of the albums that moved me very much when I was younger was Sgt. Pepper's. I know that's going to be a choice for lots of people and a populist choice, if you like. But it was just fascinating to listen to that. And I remember opening the gatefold sleeve, and it was the Fab Four staring back in this highly vibrant, colored picture. And these just looked like four guys who could be your brothers. And yet they were in this band. They were making this incredible music, all of it accessible to, a 7 or 8 year old. And I thought it was breathtaking what they were doing. And it was only as I got older that I realized the techniques they were using to make things happen were exactly what David Byrne talks about, in the sense that these great orchestras are brought together to perform a small section on a Beatles song, like A Day in the Life or something. It's the, that ability in the recording process as it evolved from the early part of the 20th century to make things more and more complex, to make recordings more complicated. I think that album sort of represented the pinnacle of that journey at that time, which was really all about how can the recording begin to surpass the live event. He talks there about big bands and that's worth trying to remember what that must have been like as an experience, because there was a time in the 50s and 60s, early 60s certainly, where all you would have heard if you'd gone out would have been big bands. And certainly that was true in America. If you were to go to New York, you would just be, going into one place. You would know this, W, but you'd be going into one place. There'd be a huge big band going there. Then next door, there'd be another band, totally different drummer, different musicians, but just sounding just as hot. And it's the way in which it happened so rapidly that sort of collapsed and gave way to rock and roll and the backbeat, and then suddenly the importation of recording studio ideas, which when it arrived at the Beatles and that album, was beginning to eclipse the live sound, and that I think was quite significant. So that album meant a lot to me.
I actually want to ask you a follow-up question to
Sure.
what you beautifully stated there. So many people that I've spoken with on this podcast feature have referenced and have cited the Beatles of a tremendous inspiration for a wide variety of reasons. So what I want to ask you, as you mentioned Sgt. Pepper's, tell the audience, the listeners and me, what band besides the Beatles did you really start taking notice of because of the style of drumming?
I think that would be, for me, one of the first bands I heard was the Jimi Hendrix Experience. We are going back a long way now. But there was this whole narrative going on at the time, which was the Beatles had kind of, Paul McCartney looked a little bit like JFK, and there was that kind of America was, mourning his loss, and the Beatles kind of come through the wall, and it's all very English and takes off. And then this was already allowing an English invasion into America of blues records, which had already been recorded in the States, but had never been played because the performers were, they weren't white. And I think that the element really in so much of that was the way in which you had rhythm and blues bashing into pop music. This was really throwing America a 7 because it couldn't square the two things. And as you know, there were in some parts of the States, there were campaigns to ban the Beatles because it was just too hot. But what they'd managed to do was fuse together this amalgam. And Jimi Hendrix then took it one stage further. It was suddenly improvisational. It was blues. And then on top of that, it was this active singer. He wasn't a passive blues singer. He was an active singer. In other words, this was a guy who'd have a guitar around his neck all day long. He'd eat breakfast, guitar around his neck. And the way he sung, and the way he played the guitar was like a liberation. It was not just threatening to white America, it was actually liberating for those who'd suffered. The music just resonated with that politically for me. So that was something else, even though it wasn't heavily produced and the drumming was certainly very busier compared to other stuff. Are You Experienced or Electric Ladyland? These albums are just breathtaking to listen to because the energy, the spiritual energy in them is terrifying, I think.
For people that have spoken to me about their reverence and high regard for Jimi Hendrix Experience, those albums that you mentioned, I've never heard the term liberating before. And that really caught my attention. Thank you for sharing. Ellen, would you like to share an album or two that I know just kind of...
Well, yeah, given that the Beatles are taken, it's kind of the easy one, isn't it? Cheating there from Andy. I was going to say the record that kind of at a young age alerted me to what you can do with sound beyond the Beatles is So by Peter Gabriel. It's something in the sonic of it that's just, it's a very produced sounding album, right? It's super clean sounding album. There's a lot of 80s music that kind of sounds a bit like that, but it can sound a bit thin and parpy sometimes. But So sounds fantastic because it still has bass in it, obviously, because Tony Lemon is playing bass on it. But also, the production aligns with the way the songs are written, right? You can't think about the songs without thinking about the sound of the songs. And that means that they're produced really well. So the writing and the production are all part of the single process. And that's not what I thought when I was listening to it when I was 11, but that's how I think about it now. And I think that's but I think that's why I thought it was good, even if I wouldn't have described it like that at the time. But that was a massive thing for me. And a lot of stuff even now, like records from the 90s that I loved, when I listen to them now, they sound like they're from the 90s. Maybe in a good way, maybe in a bad way. But I think you could bring So out now, and if it charted, I don't know, as Keely says, there's no hits. But if it was a hit, you wouldn't think, oh wow, that sounds like it's 1986. It would just sound great because it sounds great.
And going back to what Andrew said about the blues and soul and all that, if you look at So and listen to it, those monster smash hits were all rooted in that big brassy sound, right?
Absolutely. It's a Motown song. What's the big
Yeah,
hit
it's a
on it?
totally Motown.
It's totally a Motown song. But also, I saw Peter Gabriel like 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and he's a soul singer. When he hits those high notes, which he still can, I don't know how old he is now, but he can absolutely smash those high notes. And when he's doing that, he's soul singing. It's really white music. It's really English music, but it's totally soul.
And I love that you bring him up. I was speaking with ex-Lotus Eaters, Peter Coyle, who loves Peter Gabriel, and had his take on him and what his music has done for him in terms of kind of a transcendental way in elevating the spirit and the soul and all that amazing stuff. So awesome pick. We could go on and on about all these wonderful topics, but I definitely want to hit on this new album, Girl on the Edge of the World, third full-length album from KEELEY. And before we go into it, I want to read a very heavy quote from an incident that ties directly to the themes of these KEELEY albums. In 1993, here in the Bay Area, Petaluma, California, there was a gentleman by the name of Mark Class, and he had a daughter named Polly Class. Polly was having a sleepover, and in the middle of the night, a gentleman had broken into his daughter's room, tied the young girls up, and he removed Polly Class from the bedroom, killed her within several hours after kidnapping. They spent 63 days trying to figure out and capture. They found the gentleman, the perpetrator. But during the hunt, it impacted me such a great deal. I drove to Petaluma, and there was a call center, if you will, people taking tips, anything. And there were all these flowers in front of that building. And I just sat there in my car and cried. It was so emotionally visceral for me. And I had no connection to this family. It was unfathomable. Okay, so where I'm going with this, KEELEY, if you wouldn't mind giving us an update on anything that you can divulge and disclose regarding Inga Marie Hauser. And since the last time we spoke last year, because I know her murder, her death impacted you significantly.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, for those who don't know, like for those who might be listening to this podcast and this is the first time they've come across me and us and our music and everything that we create, it's a unique body of work in that it's an entire discography based on the life of a murder victim. Essentially, it's never been done before. There's never been an album devoted to the life of a murder victim, let alone an entire discography. And it's something that I have to give Alan huge credit for because it's such an unlikely concept for a body of work. I mean, it hasn't been done. Who would think that it would be possible or viable even to kind of do it? But that's really all that I had when I met Alan for the first time back in. And there's a story about the night that Alan and I met that I'd love to tell, some other time because it's quite a memorable story. But when I presented that concept to Alan, and that's all I had. I had this really strange concept. I was absolutely adamant that I wanted to try and do this. And he trusted my vision and he brought his own production vision to the project and his gifts as a musician as well as a sonic seer. And we set about embarking upon this creative journey. It's been an amazing creative journey, and we've both been very loyal and very patient. Alan's a very patient person. He's been amazing to work with. We're both very, very quick in the studio as well, which is really a lovely compatible thing. Because I've worked in the past with other producers who haven't been as quick as Alan is. Alan is really quick in the studio, so it means that you don't get bogged down in kind of studio fog, whatever. We always come out with recordings and finished tracks very, very quickly. But it's this entire musical world that is devoted to her story. Whilst the story is being told musically over the course of all of these records, and in addition to the 3 studio albums, there's also 2 mini albums. Our debut mini album, Drawn to the Flame, and a new mini album called Lost Magic, which consists of songs that were recorded during the sessions for Girl on the Edge of the World, which didn't make it on to the record, but is definitely part of the story. And effectively, it makes this record our first double album, because it's actually going to be a double vinyl. It's an amazing package, and I have to give credit to our manager, Nick Clift, who Lukey referenced earlier. And it was lovely to hear Lukey say that, because Nick has been so hugely influential and helpful to me personally, and to us as a band and as a project. He knits the whole thing together so wonderfully well, and we have a very close bond with him. And essentially, it's us against the world, and that it's a lovely, with the times that we live in, which are very fractured and very fragmented, and increasingly your friends, your partners are all you've really got, to kind of go to war with the world with them. And we have each other, and we've embarked upon this creative journey. We don't know where it's going to end up or who it's going to involve, but we've already had so many really interesting experiences along the way. Lucky's mentioned quite a few of them there in terms of like touring, the amazing bands we've got to tour with and play with. But another story that is kind of coexisting alongside that is that of Inga herself as a sort of a ghostly presence who kind of overshadows all of what we create. And she's always there. Because all of the songs are about her, and her life, unbeknownst to her life gave birth to all of these. Well, essentially her life gave birth to our sonic life and our life as a band, because she's in the grooves. She's in all of the words, all of the, it's all about her, and she inspires and influences all of the material. And then along a parallel line, there's also her case, which is a very different, a very different journey. And it's one that is much more frustrating. Whereas for all of the challenges in the musical world that we overcome by sheer force of will, and as quickly as we marshal and that we do what we do, and that we work in the studio, and as prolific as we are as recording artists, releasing an album every year and all that. Inga's case is unlike any in the annals of true crime history that I'm aware of, where you can have years and years of nothing, no updates, no developments, and then boom, out of nowhere, seemingly a breakthrough. And then it turns out to have been a false dawn. And then the case will lie dormant for several more years. And then boom, out of nowhere, there'll be another apparent breakthrough. And then it'll turn out to be a false dawn. And then it'll go on. And then the same thing will happen every 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And the case never falls dormant for long enough for it to be entirely dormant. But none of the uprisings in the case, or none of the developments, are ever significant enough to solve the case, or to see the case proceed to court. So it's an incredibly frustrating case, a very, very long running. I mean, Inga was murdered in 1988, so we're talking 38 years this year. And yet hope persists, because how do I even describe them at this stage? The persons of interest where in this case concerned, the only suspect, or certainly the prime suspect, is still alive, and some of those who are believed to have assisted him in the course of her murder are still alive. So the case is kind of mired in all sorts of legal difficulties and investigative difficulties and various other things that have happened over the years. One development that has occurred in the last year has been the push for an inquest. So ordinarily there would have been an inquest held quite soon after Inga's murder. That wasn't the case. There was an administrative procedure, very much a kind of a box ticking exercise in 1990, which wasn't an inquest in that there was no evidence heard, there was no testimony, nothing like that, and the relevant documents were misfiled. One wonders whether that was entirely accidental or whether there was intent behind it to kind of stymie the investigation. It's unknown, but there is an inquest, which, when I say it's proceeding in the way that inquests in Northern Ireland that are mired in controversy proceed, which is incredibly slowly, and they're being challenged. You know, I mean, we had an inquest pre-hearing in November of 2024, and then the next inquest pre-hearing was on the 1st of May. It was set to be held, and then there was another one that was postponed, and then actually the one on the 1st of May was postponed, and it's not going to be taking place now until February 6th. So it's very frustrating. There's no clear end in sight. And what I would say is that certainly the PPS decision, which was the Public Prosecution Service of Northern Ireland, they made the decision not to prosecute two individuals who had files on them submitted by the PSNI, which is the Police Service of Northern Ireland. That decision was made in 2019 not to prosecute on basis that the evidence presented was not sufficient to pass the threshold necessary to proceed to court on charges of murder. So there's no clear answer, unfortunately, with regards to in this case. And while we can hope to try and gain more answers as a result of the inquest, even the inquest itself is not a straightforward scenario. It could take as long as 2 years of pre-inquest hearings before even the inquest can be held. Yeah, don't hold your breath.
Thank you for this update. Much appreciation.
You're so welcome.
What you had to share. And I like how you use the word hope. And I think with this new album, I want to give Lukey a chance, and obviously Andrew and Alan to share their thoughts on this now. Okay, Lukey, you want to share anything about this new album? And what's the Sonic Odyssey?
That is a really interesting observation, W, that you make there. And I wonder if some of that's down to confidence. Keeley and Alan have been working together as a brilliant partnership now for a good number of years. And hopefully Andrew and I coming in, that hopefully the listeners will think that's a welcome addition. I think in terms of the journey we've gone on as a sonic unit, the four of us, it feels like things are coming together more in terms of being known out there in the world. We have to work incredibly hard at it, and the struggle continues. We will never stop working on that. There's always more to achieve, and our goals are high. But certainly this in 2025, the year just gone, we felt like we went up a level as a sonic unit, and I'd like to think that the new album reflects that. And with that, I think comes that sense of hope. And also kind of there's a sense of strength in numbers as well, I think, because certainly what Inga's story symbolizes for me, and I think for everyone else here, is the brutality of the patriarchy, and that single brutal incident really highlights what a crazy and unequal world we live in, and male dominated. And I personally am someone who, it's why I'm drawn to my job in adult social care, to look out for the most marginalized people in our society, the most vulnerable people. And that's why I found it very easy to get behind the core of the project, the meaning behind it that Keeley has brought to it. And I feel like when we're recording these songs and when we're going out and playing them, that it's like taking on the patriarchy, essentially taking on the establishment, taking on the echelons of power that maintain the status quo. I mean, Keeley alluded to there, some goings on with the case that indicate that, things have been mismanaged in some way. And there's so many different facets to it. Keeley and Alan have formed this brilliant sonic balance between the two of them. And what Andrew and I have been able to bring, for me, is kind of like a new cutting edge to it, as it were. Kind of in the takes we've done, we pour our energy into it, and that's what we go on stage. I'm very much a Kim Gordon fan of Sonic Youth. She's my biggest bass influence, and that's what I do. I attack the thing when I'm up on stage. I've had to pare it down a bit for the recordings, of course, but that spirit's still in there, which Alan's managed to capture well, I think, when I went home to work with him in Dublin in 2025. So yeah, I think there's various facets to it, but yeah, I certainly agree. There's a confidence in there, and with that confidence comes increased hope.
Yes. And I want to listen to a track that I feel underscores exactly what you said. We're going to listen to track number 2. This is called Crossing Lands from this amazing album. Okay, so now that we've heard this song, Lukey, your bass line is so muscular here. It's melodic. It anchors everything down. And what I love about this track, even though it's number 2 track, I feel like it's an opening statement. It feels very New Order-ish to me. It has that dancey, again, going back to the hope feel. It may not translate in the lyrics or anything like that, but then it's got this big sweeping chorus. And that's where I feel like the cohesion, I felt like, fuck, this band is fully arrived now. They're ready to really stretch the wings. So I want to ask Alan, in terms of production of this song or any other songs you want to talk about, what's your take on where the band has evolved and how it's evolved?
Well, just generally for a second, I think you're talking about the difference between this record and the previous ones. And I think definitely it's more cohesive. And I would put that down to the fact that Andy and Mookie are on the tracks, and it just brings everything together more. And you get a sense of people being together, and it's a different energy and it's a different level of kind of commitment. I think, Luke, you might have actually said that word, but I think you can hear it. That song, though, I'll tell you about that song. I buy guitars for a hobby, and I bought a guitar for like $70 online, and it was an absolute dog. But when I plugged in it sounded really aggressive and horrible, and it was like objectively a really bad guitar. But I thought, oh, this sounds like Gang of Four or something. That kind of really kind of just broken, not like it shouldn't sound like that. So you wouldn't hear it in a Steely Dan record, right? And so I did the basic part for that track. I wrote it in like 10 minutes and then recorded the basic backing track in about an hour. And I thought, oh yeah, this sounds kind of new wavy, or not. What am I thinking? Like post punk kind of thing, like Gang of Four. And then Keeley texted me that night. She said, we're on tour. We're in Leeds, and which is where that band are from. So I was like, oh, that's funny. I did this track. You might think it's interesting. So that's how it started. But then, yeah, Lukey came over and put the bass line down, sitting on the seat that I'm sitting in right now. So yeah, it's a good, fun kind of short, sharp track. I think it's enjoyed doing it.
It's got a lot of punch. Keely, you want to say something?
It had. I love the way that you picked that song out to ask Alan about, because Alan was so integral to that song in particular, because that is the song on the record that Alan wrote the music for. And Alan and I have written a number of songs together. We don't write many songs together, but when we do, we always get really interesting results. And that's one of the reasons why I love writing with him. For example, we wrote on the first album, we wrote a song called, well, actually one of the singles, Arrive Alive, which we play live a lot. We wrote that together, and we wrote Totally Entranced, which is a beautiful song towards the end of that record, which was also a single. And then on the second record, our second album, Beautiful Mysterious, we wrote Trans Europe 18. And when Alan originally presented Crossing Lands, or it didn't have a title when he presented it to me, and I listened to it, and the original idea was that it might work as a sort of as a non-album single, which actually was, funnily enough, which was going to be the original purpose for what became Trans Europe 18. But because of the albums are very much constructed conceptually in a linear way, and particularly Beautiful Mysterious, the second album, and the new album, they very much tell a story from start to finish. So the story that Crossing Lands tells just happens to be the part of the overall story that comes very early on in the story, which is the second part. So basically, the first track is Inga being in Munich and traveling up through Germany into the Netherlands, traveling from the Hook of Holland over to England. Just that basically that hunger to see the world, and that hunger for that desire. You know, if there's one word that sums up Hungry for the Prize, which is the first track on the album, it's desire. Desiring something is one thing, getting it is another. And Crossing Lands is the start of her getting what she was after. And because when Alan played me that piece of music, it sounded so urgent, and there's an urgency to it that I loved. And I love that I decided it had to go on the record because there's a bite to it and an energy to it and a sort of a sonic ferocity to it that is unlike anything else on the record. And we also play it live, and we always play it live. It's a really, really key song on the record, and I think it's going to be a single too. But yeah, it's a song that kind of took some twists and turns. And I was originally going to sing it in a lower register, and then I decided to sing it in a higher register. And then I asked Alan, hey, can we put my low register and the high register together as like a harmony? And then it ended up working like that. So it's one of the things I love about making a record. You're constantly discovering, you know, in terms of the songs, in terms of the sounds, and you never quite know what you've ended up with until you finish the record, until you're really well into mixing. And even sometimes it's not until after the record is finished that you go, oh, so that's what it is. You know, it's a beautiful experience. You never know where you're going to end up. And then even afterwards, you're like, well, I'm not sure if I'm the best person to even say what this record is. That's why I think it's for the listeners to say, well, this is what we think it is, because it's but one thing I'm sure of is that it's its own thing. There's nothing else like it in popular music. It's its own thing. It's a story unlike any other, and you either like it or you don't, but it's its own thing.
Well articulated, Lukey.
Yeah, going back to Crossing Lands, what Alan mentioned about Gang of Four, Alan and I hadn't had a conversation about it before I'd heard the track, and I got Gang of Four vibes instantly, which I was thrilled about because they are such an awesome band. I've seen them live a number of times, and it's a track where the core of it was really good already. What Alan had done, as Keely mentioned, he wrote the music for that, and that what I love about our creative process as well is Keely and Alan at the moment, they've come up with stuff initially, and it's very much an unspoken thing, but the intuition's there to sort of see, well, there's some parts where, you know, it's quite well formed already. Crossing Lands, the riff for that in the verse was one of them, but I'll what I tend to do is some embellishment of my own, and it evolves as we start to play it live and rehearse and things like that. There always are differences between the record and how it's played live. That's it's certainly the case for the stuff from the previous albums we do live as well. But yeah, sometimes it will be like a bit more of a, you know, blank canvas, as it were, and be like, right, I can go wild on that. with Crossing Lands, it was like that riff in the verse. I love playing that so much. On stage live, I get to channel my inner Andy Gill, where he does like that ice piercing stare. That's what I tend to do when we play it live. I'm just like psyching out the crowd. It's such a great opportunity to do that. So yeah, I'm so glad you've played that track and referenced it. Yeah, absolutely love that one.
You're absolutely welcome. And we're going to listen to another track. And actually, I don't know if this is my favorite yet, but it's creeping up there. And it is called London Fields. Let's take a listen.
A million avenues and alleyways, a thousand towns, alleys of motorways. London feels the lungs of life. Who knows where I'll be by tea time? London feels the lungs of life. Who knows where I'll be by tea time? Hop on the tube to Enfields. Just me.
Okay, so one of the things that struck me about this song is the calm, but the beautiful shimmery guitar work, the soft drumming. And there's a line in here I want to read to all the listeners and, of course, the band. I love this line. London Fields, the lungs of life. If I were still teaching elementary school students, I would be very knee deep in figurative language with them. And this album is some wonderful metaphors. And I feel like that's one of the strongest metaphors. It just evokes and it creates that imagery for me. So whoever wants to share anything about this beautiful song, London Fields, give us a hand raise.
Yeah. London Fields. I dreamed that song. It came to me in a dream, musically, lyrically. I was asleep, which I always am during the day. I have a ridiculous, the boys know about this. I mentioned, we were on tour somewhere. I think we were on tour with the Primitives. And I mentioned to the boys about, I think I was talking about something that I'd done the previous night when I decided to have an early night. And by me having an early night, it means going to bed at 5 a.m. rather than 6 or 7 a.m. in the morning. Anyway, but I was asleep. I woke up and I had that song in my head. And it only happens to me maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And with London Fields and the song that appears after it on the record London Underground, that happened 2 days in a row. 2 successive days I woke up from sleep with a song in my head. And I got out of bed and I went into this room, which is my living room, picked up the guitar, found the notes that I could hear in my ear, and just recorded a really rough demo of the song. So, I mean, you hear the story of like McCartney dreaming yesterday. I mean, it's happened to me a bunch of times. It happens a couple of times a year, but for it to happen 2 days in a row it had never happened before. And it's funny, that song nearly didn't end up on the record because there's another song called Lost in the Magic Maze, which was going to be on the record in that sequence, in that as track 4. And then it ended up at the very last minute not making it onto the record. But Lost in the Magic Maze ended up being track 1 on the Lost Magic mini album. So I'm really, really glad. It's a lovely song too. But yeah, London Fields, it's something that, I mean, I love Alan's production of it. It's the beautiful mellotron. It's so simple. I love the simplicity of it and the subtlety of it and the way Alan heard it as like this. It's unlike anything else that we've ever recorded, and unusually for me, because I like a lot of creative people, I find repetition boring, but I managed to probably do more repetition towards the end of that song than I've ever done in a song, where I repeat the kind of main line over and over and over. I think I repeat it 8 times. There's a rhyming couplet at the end, or 2 lines anyway, and they repeat it, almost like a mantra. in a way which is very unusual for me with a song. That usually doesn't happen. So there's a lot of unusual things about that song.
I'm glad you kept it on the album. And I hope this is a track that you'll play live and it'll obviously bring the house down a little bit, depending on the mood, the vibrance, the lighting, all that stuff. But I hope this album doesn't get lost, or this song doesn't get lost within everything about this. And yeah, it's a really special track. Andrew, do you want to share anything?
My experience with the album has been one of learning to kind of incorporate what I do with what Alan does. Up to this point, I think Alan was working in his own environment, and suddenly a drummer arrives and insists on being on the recordings. And that's a challenge at the best of times. And I'm very grateful for him to, first of all, to have taken the challenge, but also to have accommodated it so well. I think the tracks that have the live drumming on them have captured something of what Luke has been saying, which is that the live elements are now beginning to form a pretty significant structure in the shape of the project. And I think this is the album that sort of begins that transition, if you like, or that alteration. I felt nothing but joy when I was playing these in our studio and recording them, and it's just great to hear them back and finally mixed. They sound brilliant.
They do sound brilliant. And another thing I want to add about this album is that there's some special guests that appear. And Ice from Boo Radley's, who Keeley and I have had the pleasure of having a great conversation with him, and obviously his ear for the pop prowess, so good. And then, of course, Mickey Bereni. And we're going to listen to this track called Big Brown Eyes, track number 6.
Went to Oxford, stayed at the youth hostel, decided to go to Bath. Big brown eyes, staring out the window at the English countryside. Whispers at the vista of Oxford's dreaming spires. Lost in space, a sudden splash of sun pours above.
I've had the pleasure of speaking with Mickey, and I think she still holds the world podcast record for most swear words, but that's a whole nother. But I thought
That
it was
would be Mickey.
a great collaboration. So this is a hell of a track. Anyone want to share anything about Big Brown Eyes featuring Mickey Bereni? Alan raised his hand. Go for it.
So, real quick, when I got the vocals back from Mickey, first of all, they sound great because she does these melodies that other people wouldn't think of doing. And when you hear them on their own, you think, well, that's not in the track. But when you put it up against the track, it works perfectly. And all those little things that are not what you expect turn out to be the earworms. They're the best parts of it, right? But it's the only time I've ever sent a singer a rough mix of a track where they said, turn the vocals down. That has never happened before. So props to Mickey for that, having the self-awareness to say the vocals are too loud. It's the first and perhaps the last time that's ever happened.
Love these nuggets. Lukey, go ahead.
I'm really glad you raised this track as well, because for me, not just in terms of where it sits on the album, in the middle, closing out the first half. I think Keeley used these words actually, so I'm completely stealing them from her. But it's the emotional centerpiece of the album, is how she describes it, and I think that's a perfect summation, because I'm so proud of all the album, but it's the point for me where I get goosebumps every time I hear it. Just in terms of, I really do feel like that's the instance where the five of us, Mickey included, coming together, it's like greater than the sum of its parts. It's got something there that's completely intangible and mystical to it. Yeah, I listen to it and think, how the fuck did we create that? To be honest, yeah, I'm so chuffed with it. And I hope the listeners agree with this as they hear it. But I think on repeated unlistens, more and more layers unfold. So that's testament to Alan's production as well, and also being able to balance Keeley's and Mickey's voices. And as Alan said there, kind of the melodies that Mickey's doing there are quite unconventional, really, for backing vocals. And it brought to mind kind of some what Belinda does with her backing vocals for My Bloody Valentine songs. It's like, it's not the obvious notes you go for, and yeah, it's a wonderful song on its own, but also really holds the album together as that true centerpiece.
It does, and again, well articulated, Lukey. And I also give you all of you some complimentary words here. When I heard this song 2 or 3 times, I was thinking, I can picture David Lynch hearing this song like this, and maybe if he were still alive, rest in peace, David would feel that enigmatic quality, but there's a celestial feeling to this song based on those vocals work. And I could almost picture David going, yeah, we got to get this song inside this film. I don't care how we do it. We're going to do it. It's just something I know he would probably embrace. So that's my compliment to this creation here. And then the lyrics, big brown eyes staring out the window at the English countryside. Your desire whispers at the vista of Oxford's dreaming spires. It's all good. Keeley, you want to say something?
Yeah, no, there's a few things to say. I loved what Alan said with regards to Mickey, because we live in a world that is so soaked in ego. Everyone everywhere is egomaniac and wants to be the loudest and the biggest and and for Mickey to go, guys, can you turn me down? It was just such a lovely surprise, and something that probably no lead singer has ever said. But the other thing about her vocals that blew me away was when I asked her to sing on the record. Oh yeah, there's Fingers Crossed, her wonderful memoir, that you're holding up to the camera, Dovia. Thank you. Yeah, when I first approached Mickey to ask her, because the thing is, there was something about Big Brown Eyes that Alan and I felt just needed something, and it was the song that seemed to be crying out for a contribution from Mickey. So when I asked her, would she sing on the record? And she said, yes. I was so glad she did. I sent her Big Brown Eyes. It wasn't like I said, sing this song or that song, or take your pick. It was specifically that song we were really hoping that she would sing on. But I was expecting that she would harmonize with my lead vocal. And it would be just, a simple matter of just kind of doing backing vocals. And what she did was she wrote her own top line, her own lead vocal around my lead vocal in such a way that it interweaves with it. So it's not clashing with it. Like, the way she writes melody lines is pretty genius, I have to say. And I don't know if she would even recognize that what she does is so special, because she's got such a distinctive voice anyway. Anyone who hears any of those Lush tracks would know her voice a mile off. But what she does in this song is just, as Alan referred to, all these little mini hooks that appear towards the end of it and stuff. Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. The other thing about this song was that I wrote it in my last day living in a place called Sandy Cove in my old flat, Moss Manor, which I nicknamed it Moss Manor. It was a 1-room flat. It wasn't like it was, Green Gables or something. But I was being evicted because the landlord wanted it back for his own use. And I'm involved in a film which is underway or kind of in production. And because I have the place design, I had that flat designed in a very similar way to the way I have my living room here designed, which is just like this explosion of music love. And the producer and director of the film sent a film crew around to film me in my flat because it was the last chance that they'd get to do that before I had to tear it all down and move the following day. And while they were there, they said, could you show us an example? No, they said, how do you write songs? And I said, well, there's two ways that I write songs. Either unless I wake up in the morning and there's a song in my head, like with London Fields or London Underground, it would be either I just pick the guitar up and a song just tumbles out, like it just falls out, or I hear music in my ear and then I just find the notes and then it becomes a song. I never sit down and try and write a song. And they said, can you give us an example? I said, sure. I said, and I sat down, I picked up a guitar, they had the cameras on, and I just started playing a chord, an arpeggiated kind of chord sequence. And a song started writing itself there and then in the room. It was and it was like, so that song was written on camera with me not expecting that a song was going to fall out. But that's the thing. You never know when a song is just going to suddenly be born. And it turned out to be that. So yeah, it's gone on a lovely journey. But yeah, lyrically, I just love the way it unfolds, and between Alan's production and what we all add to it. It's a real, sonically, it's probably the dreamiest and probably one of the most ghostly things on the record, because I was trying to get as close as I could to that window pane, that grime-laden window frame of the British rail train that Inga was on her way from London to Oxford, to Bath, Cambridge, Preston, Inverness, all those places, and particularly Oxford, because when I arrived in Oxford, when I was retracing Inga's steps back in 2018, and 30 years after she'd been there, and I stepped off the train, and it was a really, I'd never been to Oxford before, and I was really struck by how beautiful it was. Then I learned that it was referred to as the city of dreaming spires. So that ended up in the lyric that you mentioned there, Tavia.
You're so observant of the world and what you take in, and also the connections, obviously, with Inga, and how you weave these stories, these mini stories together to build one big story about these thematic concerns. It's quite impressive. And I do want to talk about one more song, and it actually is called Trains and Daydreams, another song I love. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, I had the great fortune of speaking with KEELEY and Seiss last year in 2025, and KEELEY and I sang Seiss's praises, the way his pop sensibilities work, and he just has that ear for all this stuff. This again, lower in tempo, shimmery, beautiful guitar work, slow intro. It's just one of those songs that it just hooks you in. It's a song of restraint to me. So anything anybody wants to share about Trains and Daydreams, I'd love to hear it. Andrew.
Yeah, I think this is one of the standout tracks for me because it's got a swagger to it. It's got a groove, which in all my years playing the drums, it's the one thing that you're looking to try to achieve. You really are looking to play on something that rhythmically connects to the universe. Sorry, I haven't just taken the stuff that the other guy did, but you're looking for that ideal drum track, the ideal drumming that just blends into everything else. And I don't know whether it's the tempo, I don't know whether it's Keeley's riffs or the bass line, but there's something about it that is very, very satisfying. I could carry on playing that all night because it's so easygoing and satisfying. It's great. So just purely from a drumming point of view, it's a joy to play. It really is.
And you do
Right.
a really good job. Keeley?
Yeah, it was a song that it arrived during a furious batch or kind of outburst of songwriting. I'd moved to a place in Ireland called Julianstown. It's where I moved to after I left Sandy Coast. When you move flat, what I find often happens is the freshness of it and the newness of your surrounding. You often get a kind of bit of a new lease of life, where you're kind of uprooted from familiar surroundings and you're suddenly catapulted into a new realm. And I wrote so many songs living there, and there was a particular purple patch over maybe about a month where I wrote about 30 songs. And I remember, I remember sending Alan a, a bunch of demos. I think I've written 6 songs in 3 days or something. I sent him a bunch of demos to kind of start working on the production of. And then I think the following day I sent him another 6. It was a frenetic, as we say, scattershot, songwriting rampage, and Trains and Daydreams was one of the songs that was written during that kind of real purple patch. And I loved it from the get-go. I felt really, really confident about it from the get-go. And there's a chord in there. There's a weird chord in the chorus, which I know Lukey loves because he's mentioned it to me a few times, which is a lovely thing. But what's happened as well, what I often find is that I've talked with Mickey about this actually, because rehearsing and playing live, I think, are so important. I mean, when I think of how music develops, and this is something which can sometimes be a pro or a con, depending. But the more when we decide to start playing songs in the live set, and we rehearse them for the stage, and then we start playing them live, and my vocal melodies will change over time, and my guitar parts will change, and I'll often rewrite my solos, and all sorts of things will change. And then I'll have to go back into the studio, re-record the vocals, re-record the guitars. Now, Alan has been so patient with me so many times for rolling with the changes, the natural evolution of the song. But it also makes me think of those bands, say one of my favorite bands, which is XTC, who quit playing live. And a lot of my favorite bands gave up playing live very early on, whether it's the Beatles or Steely Dan, who I know Andrew's a huge fan of as well, or XTC or Big Star. A lot of bands just gave up playing live. Talking Heads quit playing live, pretty early too. And you wonder, I really believe in playing live. I know that we're all really passionate about playing live, and I think it's so important for the music, even for the studio, dimension of the band, because you find that what you do live does inform the studio version, because there's always a better way to play a song or play a guitar solo, but you don't discover it unless you practice the song and over again, then you play it live, and you tweak it. Even now, there's little bits that I wish I could go back in and re-record. For example, on the first track on the album, Hungry for the Prize, in the studio, and I know this is just one word, but there's the word "yeah," where I kind of say it in a kind of a low register. And live, I started doing it in a higher register, and it makes so much more sense to do it like that. I'm like, I wish I'd known that when I was recording it the first time. So all of these things, I often wonder how many other bands wish they could go back into the studio again and just tweak that bit and just but I'm sure probably so many would if they could. But in terms of parts, other bands might want to re-record a vocal, but the same part, but just little, Seeing Everything, which is another song which is on, Seeing Everything was a song from our debut album, Floating Above Everything Else. But there's a new version of it on the mini album Lost Magic, which comes out with physical copies of Go on the Edge of the World. And the vocal melodies of that song have changed over time very much. So there's always extra bits in the songs, and you don't discover them at the time. It's mad how that is. Have you come across that before with other cats that you've interviewed, W? Have you encountered that with other musicians that they're still discovering better ways to sing and play their songs even years later.
Ad infinitum. I've heard that over time and time again. And what I call it now is the Kubrick effect, and how people get so obsessive in the reflection of their work. And sometimes they have such a hard time letting go of the work and letting it breathe like a good bottle of wine. Before we wrap this up, I want to hand the next question over to Alan. And I want, Alan, for you to share with us, what do you want people to experience? So obviously, what Keeley said, they're going to take away whatever they're going to take away. But what is it that you hope for people, music lovers, to access, and to anything else?
I know what I want when I hear music and I'm hearing new music. I want it to take me out of my own head, take me out of the space that I'm in, and just live somewhere else for a couple of minutes. And you want to be surprised a bit, and maybe you want to be consoled a bit. But what you really want to do is, maybe it's like escapism, but maybe escapism sounds bad. I mean, it can't really be escapism given what the music is about, right? But still, it's a question of being somehow transformed, I think, by the act of just listening to sound, which is the maddest thing in the world, really, when you think about it. If music didn't exist and you said there's this thing, you listen to sounds and it makes you feel things, no one would believe you. They'd think you were crazy. But it happens all the time. And it's insane that you can just do this. And that after all this time, you could still make new things that people haven't heard before. So it's amazing making a song that no one's heard. And then it's amazing being a person in the world and hearing a song for the first time. So to be a part of that is, I suppose, the reason why we all keep doing what we're doing. That's my hope, simply that people are transported by the experience of listening to sound.
Well, and I think all of you have achieved that goal and then some. And like previous Keeley albums, it does take the listener on a journey that compels us to really think about several things. One, obviously the music, all the arrangements. Two, the thematic issues that are at play lyrically. But three, which I have yet to experience, when I hear the albums, I often think, how would this translate in a live setting? I've seen videos, but I haven't been there in person. And one day I'm going to get me arse over there and experience that and be part of that communal feel and flavor. So hats off to all of you for this amazing album, Girl on the Edge of the World. And I want you, Keeley, to tell us, if you don't mind, upcoming tour date.
Absolutely. What is that? I was
Do you want me to reel these off, Keeley? Because I think
actually, Lukey, here's the thing. Lukey is our memory man. So Lukey's got a most fantastic memory.
Right, here we go. And that starts off Wednesday, 18th of February, London in Hackney Wick. Thursday, 19th of February, the Tim Music and Arts in Colchester. Friday, 20th of February, Bristol, Exchange Basement. Saturday, 1st of February, the Bear Cave in Bournemouth. Excited about that one. That's where my partner's family are at. Wednesday, 25th of February, Brighton, the Rossi Bar downstairs. Thursday, 26th of February, the New Adelphi Club in Hull. Friday, 27th of February, Huddersfield in Amped. It's Builders Parish Dive Bar. They have moved the venue slightly. We played there already, supporting House of All, an all-time bucket list moment for me, I must say. Saturday, 28th of February, Glasgow at the Hug and Pint, immortalised in an Arab Strap album title, that venue.
Oh, yeah.
And finishing off with Sunday, the 1st of March in Newcastle, our first time there at the Clooney 2. And that concludes the headline tour day.
And Lukey,
Nice
may
one,
I
nice
ask,
one.
these shows, will there be merchandise to be had? Some swag?
There'll be so much swag to be had. In fact, the album is getting released on the same day as we play Bristol. at the Exchange basement. But I'm sure the early birds will catch the worm in that respect. And I expect London and Coventry, we will probably have some copies of Girl on the Edge of the World on vinyl and CD, as well as all our previous releases and T-shirts and anything else we turn our hands to. You know, a Keeley penny farthing is not beyond reach.
I want to wrap this up by allowing our guests to share a recommendation. It could be an album, a TV series, a podcast they've been enjoying. It could be a movie, anything of that ilk. So let us begin with Keeley. Is there an album or anything you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, and this is going to be a bit of a left turn here, right? Rather than recommending, because there's so many albums and books that I could recommend, but I'm going to recommend, and I hope I'm not being too condescending here, but because I don't know how frequently your listeners go out to see new bands, but I'm going to recommend going out to as many gigs as possible by bands you don't know and that you've no knowledge of. And the reason I say that is because most of the time when I go out, because the thing is, there's three types of gigs I go to. One are gigs where we play with other bands and I get to watch the headliner set and I get to be on stage with us and all that. Two, legendary bands, big bands that tour, and I go see them play, and it's always amazing. And three, and this is something I only really started doing in the last year. Well, no, I've always done it, but I've made a conscious effort to do it more in the last year, and I've had amazing results. Where there's a venue in Bristol called the Lanes, where I go every week, sometimes a couple of times a week, to see bands that I don't know who they are. And most of the time, my mind is blown away by these bands. I've never heard of them. They're always on. They're our touring. So they're generally from outside of Bristol, and they'll usually have a support act with them, who are sometimes as good or sometimes even better than the headliners. And I've seen so many brilliant bands off the top of my head in the last few months there. There's Mintaka, Bug Teeth. Bug Teeth are a band from Leeds. They're amazing. Check them out. See them live. Do whatever you can to see them live. Mintaka, she's based in the Netherlands. She's from Turkey. I saw her in Bristol. She's amazing. Her band are amazing. Belicious are a Bristol-based band. There's just three bands off the top of my head, but there's so many others. So I would just say, get your ass off the couch and out to see as many gigs as possible in small venues where it's only a $5 in or a $10 in, but you just might see a band that blows your mind and changes your life. And it'll help the band more than if you go to the Enormodome and you have a restricted view and you can see Taylor Swift's shoulder from a mile away. Good as that is, that's my recommendation.
And people will pay thousands of dollars to see that shoulder.
Indeed, they do.
That's a great suggestion. I love that.
Thanks.
Luke, what do you want to suggest?
Oh, crikey. Okay, I'm going to go for something from near your neck of the woods, W. I'm going to say the latest OC's album, Abomination Revealed at Last, which came out last year. Amazing artwork. I bought it when we played in Northampton a couple of months ago. Went to a lovely record shop there called Spun Out, and we were in there for hours. Poor Andrew had to drag Keeley and I out of there to go play the gig on time. We get lost in record shops if we go there. But yeah, that's one recent album I can think. I mean, I love OCs anyway. I mean, they're a bigger band, but yeah, in terms of a live force, they are unstoppable. Two drummers, just completely frenetic. And yeah, I would highly recommend that people go out and watch them. They're always touring. I think they're back here again this year coming. But yeah, they're from your neck of the woods, W, over in San Francisco. Yeah. That album, Abomination Revealed at Last, it is a 35-minute complete blast. You have to submit to it. There's no other choice. Yeah, there's my recommendation.
It's a great recommendation. I'm going to piss you off right now. I've never seen them live. I know. Like Keeley, I'll get to it. Okay, Alan, what do you want to share?
A book called Blank Space by W. David Marks. It's a cultural history of the 21st century, and it's basically the story of why culture has sort of slowed down and there are less new things and there's less of a sense of what the future of music is. And it's super interesting. Actually, Luke mentioned Retromania by Simon Reynolds, and it's a similar-ish idea to that. But he's got some good ideas about how we can change things. The problem is that people seem to be more interested in being famous and being rich than being, culturally cool or whatever. So he's got some ideas for how to make things be culturally cool. And actually, the first thing that he says at the end of the book is to do exactly what Keeley said, and that is get off your ass and get out and actually do things in small venues and do stuff for free and be part of the community. And that's how we can have a future where we have Taylor Swift, but we also have people who aren't Taylor Swift.
Beautifully stated. And I think that what I want to say real quickly before Andrew gets a chance, here in the Bay Area, San Francisco just announced they are losing one of its most wonderful, intimate venues called Bottom of the Hill. And I hope someone can pick up those financial pieces and somehow purchase it and all those other good things that will keep that historical venue alive. But yeah,
I'm
everyone.
so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, everyone.
Oasis played their very first gig in the Bay Area there, in front of 200 people in 1994. It's like,
yeah. So, anyways, Andrew, what do you want to share?
Well, mine's a little bit more of a mainstream recommendation, but I saw this film called Bugonia, which has got Ari Aster as one of the producers. And I was stunned because it took me back to the big indie rush of the film business about, I don't know, when it was 15, 20 years ago, when suddenly indie movies were all the rage. And the thing that struck me about this was that it was such a compelling description of our time, that you could have someone so completely obsessed with the environment of their pod, their sort of the place where they exist, and that everything happening in the rest of the world has no bearing on them. They're in a silo essentially, and it just is self-supporting and self-feeding. And I just thought this film explored that brilliantly. And then right at the end, it twists it because I don't want to spoil it if you've seen it, but it just turns the whole thing on its head. It's really just an elaborate kidnapping, which is a cerebral trip of a serious magnitude. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was brilliant.
I've heard nothing but wonderful things about that film. It's being nominated for so many awards for all these upcoming award season. And yeah, it's Yorgos Lanthimos, right?
That's right. Yes, that's right. With, I think, Ari Aster and Will Tracy as one of the script writers. I think he also wrote the script for Eddington, which is Ari Aster directed, and that's an incredible movie. Again, another shot of our times.
Yeah, and
with a great soundtrack.
The great soundtrack, and I'm going to quickly recommend a movie for everyone. It's on Netflix. It is the sleeper movie of the year. And I promise to all the listeners, if you love film, if you like cerebral kind of Terrence Malick vibe, it is called Train Dreams, directed by Clint Bentley. It is a beautiful meditation on life and family and sacrifice. And it's about a gentleman that works in Washington on the railroad construction business. And that's all I'm going to say. It's slow, but there are wonderful little payoffs all the time. And not to mention, there's a Nick Cave song there. So I'm recommending.
Very good.
Yeah.
I love slow films. So that is going to hit the cinematic spot.
You will love it. Thank you, Keeley, Lukey, Alan, Andrew. This has been a real pleasure and much critical or non-populist success to this album that you have released out into the world. And I want to finish with one more quote, and this is by a gentleman, by Rick Rubin, but none of us are going to comment on this. And if you're not familiar with Rick Rubin, he's the gentleman that produced so many wonderful albums, most notably with Beastie Boys fame. And he's all over YouTube, and he speaks to these artists. But I like his quotes because sometimes they're just so simple and short and to the point. And this is what he says about ideas. If you have an idea you're excited about and you don't bring it to life, it's not uncommon for the idea to find its voice through another maker. This isn't because the other artist stole your idea, but because the idea's time has come. Just something to think about. And one more, living life as an artist is a practice. You're either engaging in the practice or you're not. The real work of the artist is a way of being in the world.
Yeah, big time.
My name is W, host of this surprise cast feature. Thank you for tuning in. And remember this, everyone. Great music is always around us. All you have to do is keep your ears open. Ciao.